The day my sister-in-law walked into my hospital's compliance office with a folder full of evidence against me. I was in the middle of a 12-hour shift. Nobody told me. I found out the way you find out about most things that are about to destroy your life. From a stranger, in a hallway, with bad lighting. A woman from HR stopped me near the medication room and said quietly, like she was apologizing for the weather, that I needed to come in the next morning. Not for a meeting, for a formal inquiry. I asked what kind. She said credential fraud. I stood there for a second. The hallway was loud. A cart rolling past, someone on a phone, the PA system doing its thing, and I just stood there. I'd been a licensed respiratory therapist for 9 years. I had a clean record. I had never once had a complaint filed against me, not from a patient, not from a physician, not from administration. I showed up. I did my job. I went home. That was my life. She handed me a paper with a time on it and walked away. My sister-in-law, I'll call her what she is, my husband's younger sister, had been working in healthcare compliance for about 3 years at that point. Not at my hospital, at the state licensing board, which meant she had access to certain records. Credential histories, disciplinary flags, the kind of database where, if you knew what you were looking for, you could spend a lot of time looking. Her name isn't important. What's important is that she had always had a problem with me. I married her brother when she was 22, and from the beginning she had opinions about that. About me, about where I came from, what I made, how I talked, what kind of wife she thought I was going to be. She never said any of it directly. She was too smart for that. It came out in small ways. A comment here, a look there. The way she'd repeat something I said at dinner, slightly wrong, and then correct herself with a smile. For years I let it go. My husband saw some of it. He didn't see all of it. That's how it works with siblings. There's a version of a person you're not going to reach, no matter how much you explain. She filed a complaint in March. I didn't know that until April, when I was sitting across from the board's investigator for the first time. The allegation was that I had misrepresented my clinical hours during my last recertification cycle, that the hours I logged didn't match the facility records, that some of the continuing education credits I submitted were from a provider that had been decertified. I remember reading it and thinking, that's specific. That's very specific. That's the kind of specific that takes time. The inquiry at my hospital was internal first. 2 administrators, a woman from legal, a long table in a conference room that nobody had decorated for anything, ever. There was a box of tissues in the center of the table that I found insulting, like they'd already decided how this was going to go. They read the allegations to me. I waited until they finished. Then I said, I'd like to see the documentation. One of the administrators, a man who had never spoken to me in the 4 years I'd worked there, slid a folder across the table. Inside was a printout from a state database showing my last continuing education submission. One of the providers was flagged, highlighted in yellow. I looked at it for a long time. Then I said, that provider wasn't decertified until 8 months after I submitted those hours. Nobody said anything. I said, the submission date is right there. The decertification date is right there. They're not the same date. The woman from legal leaned forward slightly. She asked if I had my original submission confirmation. I said yes. She asked if I had the provider's accreditation certificate from the time of the course. I said I'd have to check, but yes, I probably did, because I keep everything. That's one of those things about me that my sister-in-law probably didn't account for. I keep everything. I have a filing system that my husband makes fun of. Accordion folders by year, by category, by type. It's not because I'm paranoid. It's because I grew up without much and I learned early that paper is how you prove things exist. The meeting ended without resolution. They told me they'd be in touch. I drove home, sat in my car in the driveway for 11 minutes, and then went inside and opened my filing cabinet. Everything was there. The state board hearing was 6 weeks later. That's how long it took for them to schedule it, which meant 6 weeks of going to work and smiling, and answering questions about patients while knowing that somewhere in an office building downtown, there was an open file with my name on it. I didn't tell most people. I told my husband. I told my mother. I told nobody at work except my direct supervisor because I had to, and she was decent about it. She didn't treat me differently. which was the only thing I asked. My husband wanted to confront his sister. I asked him not to, not yet. I knew that if he did, she would have warning. She would adjust. She would have a story ready. I wanted her to walk into that hearing, thinking everything was still going her way. My sister-in-law didn't know I knew it was her, not officially. The complaint had been filed through the board's standard process. Anonymous, technically, but the investigator had told me, without telling me, that the complaint originated from someone with professional access to the licensing database. That narrowed it down considerably. And when I thought about who in my life would have both the access and the motivation, there was really only one answer. My mother-in-law had also submitted a written statement, supporting the allegations, saying that I had mentioned to her, at some family gathering, that I had taken a shortcut with my recertification. I read that and I felt something go flat inside me. I had never said that. Not those words, not anything close to those words. I don't even know what shortcut would mean in that context. I did my continuing education like everyone else. I sat through the courses. I submitted the certificates. I paid the fees. There was no shortcut. There was nothing to shortcut. My mother-in-law is a woman who loves her daughter more than she has ever been able to love anyone who married into the family. That's not a judgment. That's just an observation I made over 9 years. She's polite to me at Christmas. She sends birthday cards that are just signed with her name, no message. She would believe anything her daughter told her, and frame it however her daughter needed it framed. That statement hurt more than the formal allegations. The formal allegations I could fight with paper. The statement felt like something that couldn't be unfiled. The morning of the board hearing, I got up at 5. I'd slept maybe 3 hours. My husband made coffee and sat with me at the kitchen table without talking, which was exactly right. He knows when talking helps and when it doesn't. I brought a binder, 43 pages, tabbed and indexed. Original course completion certificates. The provider's accreditation documentation from the time of each submission. My submission confirmation emails with timestamps. A printout from the accrediting body's public archive showing the exact date the provider in question was flagged, which was, as I had noted in the hospital meeting, 8 months after my submission. I also brought a 1-page timeline I had made myself. Clean, simple, chronological. Every relevant date in order. I had numbered the corresponding tabs in my binder. My husband drove me. He waited in the lobby. The hearing room was smaller than I expected. A long table on one side, 3 board members, plus the investigator, plus someone from legal. A table on my side where I sat alone, a court reporter in the corner, windows that looked out onto a parking structure. My sister-in-law was there. I don't know why I thought she might not be. She was seated to the side, in the observer section, in a blazer I'd never seen before. She had a notepad. She was holding a pen. She didn't look at me when I walked in. That told me something. The board chair, a woman who introduced herself with her title and nothing else, explained the process. She read the allegations. She asked if I understood them. I said I did. She asked if I wished to respond. I said yes, and I opened my binder. What happened in the next 40 minutes was not dramatic, in the way people imagine these things. There was no shouting. Nobody stormed out. The court reporter typed steadily in the corner. The investigator occasionally made notes. I walked through the timeline, tab by tab, date by date. The provider accreditation certificate, tab 1, my course completion certificate, dated 7 months before the provider's flag. Tab 2, my submission confirmation, timestamped, from the board's own system. Tab 3, the public archive showing the provider's decertification date. Tab 4, one of the board members, a man who hadn't spoken yet, asked if he could see tab 4 again. I slid the binder down the table. He looked at it for a long time. He looked at the investigator. The investigator looked at her own file. There was a silence that lasted maybe 15 seconds. The board chair asked the investigator when the decertification flag had been entered into the system. The investigator said she'd need to check the records. The board chair said she'd like her to do that now. This is the part that took an hour. The investigator left the room. One of the board members made a phone call. The court reporter sat quietly. My sister-in-law, in her observer seat, had stopped writing on her notepad. I got a glass of water from the pitcher on the table and I drank it slowly. I wasn't calm. I want to be honest about that. My hands were not steady. There was a specific kind of fear I was carrying that day that I don't have a clean word for. Not fear of losing, exactly, but fear of the moment when you realize the system you've trusted your whole career might be slower than the lie that got ahead of it. But I sat there. Because sitting there was what I had. When the investigator came back, she had a printout. She placed it on the table in front of the board chair without saying anything. The board chair looked at it. She passed it to the member on her left. He passed it to the member on her right. The board chair looked up. She said, "The flag was entered into the database after your submission date. The original submission appears to be in compliance." She said it like she was reading a weather report. Neutral. Careful. I said, "I know." What came next is the part I've thought about the most. The board chair turned to the investigator and asked where the complaint had originated. The investigator, after a pause, confirmed that it had been submitted through the professional access portal, meaning from someone with a licensed compliance account, not from the general public intake. The board chair asked if the individual who submitted it had professional access through their employment. The investigator said yes. The board chair asked if that individual was present in the room. There was another silence. Longer this time, my sister-in-law stood up. She said she had submitted the complaint in good faith, based on information in the system. She said the flag existed. She said she had a professional obligation to report discrepancies. The board chair said, "The flag was added to the system after the submission you reported as fraudulent." My sister-in-law said she hadn't seen the submission date clearly. The board chair said, "You have professional access to the submission records. The date is on the same screen as the flag." My sister-in-law didn't answer that. The board chair said the hearing was recessing, while the board reviewed the circumstances of the complaint's origin. I found out later, weeks later, through my husband, who heard it from someone who heard it from someone else, that his sister had been placed on administrative leave while the board investigated whether the complaint had been filed with accurate information. Her employer, which was a state agency, had their own process for that kind of thing. I don't know exactly what happened to her professionally after that. I haven't asked. My husband knows more than I do and has mostly not shared it, which I think is his way of protecting whatever relationship he still has with his family. I don't hold that against him. What I know is that the board sent me a formal letter 6 weeks after the hearing. The complaint was dismissed. My license was clear. My record remained exactly as it had always been. 9 years, no disciplinary action, no findings, no flags. I kept the letter, filed it in the accordion folder for that year, under professional. Behind the tab I labeled board correspondence. My mother-in-law never acknowledged her written statement. Not to me directly. She didn't apologize. She sent a birthday card that November, signed with just her name, the same as always. I wrote back a thank you note, the same as always. Some things don't resolve. They just continue in a different key. My relationship with my sister-in-law is, at this point, non-existent. Not dramatically. There was no final confrontation, no scene, no ultimatum. We simply stopped being in the same rooms. When my husband's family gathers, I sometimes go and sometimes don't. He understands. He doesn't require me to perform a relationship that doesn't exist. I think about what she was actually trying to do, not the surface version, not she wanted to cause trouble or she was jealous, but the real version. The emotional math underneath it. Because I've had a lot of time to think about it. She had grown up being the smart one in her family, the capable one, the one who understood systems and rules and how institutions worked. Then her brother married someone who also understood those things, in a different field, in a way that couldn't be dismissed. I think that was difficult for her. I think she had constructed a version of me in her head that required me to be less than I was, and every year that version became harder to maintain. The shortcut comment. The thing she told her mother I said. I think she convinced herself that I had said something like that, or that I would, or that it was the kind of thing someone like me would say. That's not giving her a pass. I'm not giving her a pass. But I think that's what happened. She needed me to be cutting corners because that would have made sense of the story she'd been telling about me for years. I didn't cut corners. I never have. I became a respiratory therapist because a machine kept my grandmother breathing for 11 days. And the person who managed that machine was calm and competent and kind. And I wanted to be that for someone else. I've never needed a shortcut. I just needed to show up. The binder is still in the filing cabinet, 43 pages, tabbed and indexed. I don't imagine I'll need it again, but it's there. That's the thing about paper. It doesn't forget. It doesn't misremember. It doesn't decide, 8 years into a family relationship, that a different version of events would be more convenient. It just sits there and tells the truth, and when the right person finally looks at it, that's enough.